Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for being both at Retrace and here today for this presentation. And thank you, Morten, for the introduction. So just briefly, I'll be going through media art, some meta-face, or face data about face data, following some of our previous presenters. Then media art histories within face studies themselves. The face with 1,000 faces, its process of becoming a cognitive style over the last 3,500 years. So the beginning then of algorithmic facial expression analysis, and AFEA, or automated facial expression analysis, as an ungenre, or a not yet fully identified genre within media art. And here I'll be looking very particularly at the physiognomic syllogism within the biometric machine, within these algorithmic processes, and then looking some at the futures for our media artists dealing with these questions. So as some of our previous presenters noted, today's facial atmosphere is one where AFR and AFEA populates these informated environments, radiating down this almost Promethean or Apollonian light from that cloud of distributed closed-circuit television cameras, wireless internet networks, and unspecified electronic mugbooks, in an almost Orwellian phantasm of institutionalized control, monitoring, and watchfulness. Consequently, the datafication of society and of a person's selfhood, complete today with the facial expression of emotion, is often, usually, conceptualized, even mythologized in relation to the utopian transparency of the panopticon and the dystopian technocracy of panopticonism, which correspondingly are almost fetishized by the faciophiliac or feared by the faciophobic. I had to put Trump through facial recognition analysis here. So the data encoding of the facial expression of emotion, it palpably impresses over our senses in variation over space, time, and even that abstract space-time of an idea about face, a concept of what the face should mean, is achieved contrary to the word data's etymology as a thing given. It's achieved through a labor of a more technical kind, or form of capital. Now, this data culture stimulates what to date is a unparalleled, but importantly here, not unprecedented development of psychometric taxonomies, or what in the 18th century a critic of Lavater called the physiognomic frenzy, as we're all getting in on it. Now, this computer state, whether it's a state that is about discourse, whether it's the government, or whether it's an institution, may or may not, in fact, achieve functionality. Keep in mind, I am never saying any of this stuff works. But these digital representations afford for an identity mediation of the undesirables, the undesirable non-citizens. And that recognition technology offers this past perfect promise to redetermine present knowledge, as if through a if and if-then probabilistic sequence of thought, it becomes not just collective memory, but collective instruction over how we can control our lives, how we can guide what the data means, how we can respond to these huge events happening in our societies like 9/11, like the Snowden file release. So for example, just here locally, relatively locally, the German Bar Association, doing a presser just in August, was announcing a new pilot program. And so much the thinking behind this is simply, reductively, but still, if only security cameras had facial recognition, and if the faces of, for example, Islamic migrant terrorists had been recognized, then the deadly attack in 2016 at a Berlin Christmas market may have been averted. And then you'll see what just happened in Vienna as well. Now, this face of the age, had to borrow Shakespeare for a moment, has a lot of different applications. One, of course, is surveillance, but these are many others. Instrumented life, quantifiable self, effective computing, augmented reality learning of sign language, and on. Security and deception, as we've spoken about so far. Virtual healthcare, teaching empathy, political analysis, neuromarketing. Are people liking those movies? Disney has quite the place over in Texas. Game animation, mass media, and yes, media art. Now, through the ages, there's been a lot of studies of the face. To generalize completely the question behind all that, what signs do the sign vehicles of the face communicate? And how can their interpretations be used to compute identities on the social and societal levels? Now, overall, we can break down that question onto a trichotomic continuum of three sort of sub-questions relating to a face or body schema. So the face on a phenomenological level, first-person subjectivity, the experience of my face, this face, through its anatomical and neurotomical expression. Basic question, what is our sensory motor experience of the face? The face image, how do we consciously attend this experience, looking at epistemologically, through second person, objectivity, conceptualizing the face. And then the facial affect. To what extent is that experience mediated through techno-scientific languages? The sort of hermeneutic tier from a third person interpretation of thou, their, our face. Now, media art has a unique potential in the history of face studies. It really does. So just to go over, since we often don't scroll back to do definitions, media art, at the very basic core, is utilizing as both its medium and as its subject, as its sign vehicle and its interpretant, those emergent technologies that originate from industrial, military, or scientific contexts. Now, those are then concurrent, expressive, and content planes of eminence colliding. So, if we were to compare it to another media, then the aboutness, what it's about. If it was about face, let's say, in a painting, it would not be some allegorical visage, an ideal portrait, realistic nakedness, or some nude embodiment of ecstasy or pathos as represented in the painted image. Rather, if it was a media art talking about, it would be the very lindenwood panel and oil pigments of the painting medium itself. So with facial recognition, it's not just how the artwork is made, but what the artwork is about. And that gives it that criticality aspect, the meta-analytic tier of looking at how face is operating itself. Now, throughout all of history, the face is not just biologically relative. It's not just a phenomenological appearance. The front part of a person's head, separated from head and body. It's not just 43 bilaterally symmetrical facial muscles evolved to be a conspicuous, redundant, and stereotyped communication system, evolved through natural, selective, and sexual pressures into an intraspecific between individuals of the same species signal display to make sure that facial signs are then easily detectable, reliable across contexts, and somewhat limited in possible forms. I think current scientists have counted about 10,000, about 3,000 of which relate to emotions, so limited is relative, but it's also culturally constructed, right? An idea of selfhood assembled through face-to-face as well as mediated interaction, plotted then in agreement with social values, societal attributes like today, this biometric ethos. So that visible physiological surface developed by scholarly discourse and socio-political discussion, or face work, we might say, into explanatory models for the invisible psychological subface, the surface to the beneath. So that overcodes then, that cultural construction, it overcodes upon the proprioceptive, the sensorial body, and even head. And it's operationalized then by face researchers using metaprosthetics as rhetorical methods to deterritorialize, to separate the face from its broader organic context in a process of facialization, one might say, as Deleuze and Guattari did say, from corporeal sense to scientific calculus. Now, face studies, and importantly I note that is my term, it's not part of the literature yet, its goal there then overall is to make visible through those outside physiological behaviors of the face, so as to make knowable the psychological phenomena inside of an individual, or turn people inside out into what's universal and utilitarian. Now, those paradigmatic models then for what facial expressions might mean reciprocally inform pedagogical norms for how we experience our own faces and the faces of others, how we think about it. So the face then, as a concept, the face as a concept, is a concept with 1,000 faces. It's a moving science, a super discipline, and it's existed in many, many iterations over time, for the last 3,500 years, with also many different focuses. In ancient Greece, character, morality. In the 1900s, crime. Early 20th century, intelligence, ethnicity, gender, sort of always at one point or another, temperament during the humorist period of the Middle Ages and earlier. Today, besides just those core basics of body, it's also focusing on emotion. And so I'm going to be talking to you about artists who, in addition to Marnix de Nangis and Sterling Crispin looking at biometric data, are specifically looking at emotion as a biometric data point. So then using technological prosthetics is also nothing new in the study of face. Between the art of physiognomy and the humorous medicine of the classical age, and the science of facial expression and the digital biometrics of today's algorithmic age, thinkers working still, they were always relating to face. Like media artists today, always working at that intersection of art, science, and technology, utilizing whatever the then new or newest to new media was as a technological prosthetic to overcome the limitations of naked seeing, naked eyesight, so as to extend then perceptual capacities into the cognitive. Or by those auxiliary organs become a kind of prosthetic God, as Freud said, and as Foucault mentioned, the goal there to turn real lives into writing. So here just briefly this is using specifically the facial action coding system, which is the leading paradigm of today. I'll get into that in a minute. But here's an overview roughly of how facial studies have always abstracted the phenomenological face and those tiers of abstraction from the most iconic through indexical, through more symbolic, from the kinetic, the haptic world, through the imagistic onto the textual and the tiers of greater and greater abstraction, and folding back again. This is never necessarily a linear, one-way direction process. But what then is consistent, not just within media art today, but through all of that history? The search for meaning about the face actually has fairly well prescribed cognitive style, such that it can, in fact, throughout history, be classified as a consistent aesthetic rhetorical genre, a genre of, yes, art. Now, throughout that activity, artifacts, face artifacts, if you will, are stabilized by the systematic organization of their rhetorical figuration in both imagistic graphesis as well as linguistic textualities. And the mix of the two is always essential. To a semiotician, we call that a design of one kind or another. But that artifaction then, that process of making mediations about the face, artworks about the face, serves again to guide social actions, which include the structuring of arguments about how best to operationalize the self inside out into universal and, yes, utilitarian attributes. And apparently I have to stand right here. Thus, such rhetoricizing artifaction is not only then an intellectual activity or an artistic activity, but is also an ethical action. So let's look at some of those consistencies across time. A picture plane that isolates the face from head and body. Oh, yes. Balanced lighting with even illumination and contrast emphasis. Absolutely. Alphanumeric code as image metadata. Right here. And what I'll be focusing on to exemplify in this presentation, chronological sequences and typological series of multiple images. Okay. So I'll introduce you here the rule of many, or couldn't help a Highlander reference. There can be only more than one. Face researchers explicitly, always, self-witness in methodological expose and the intellectual provenance of their work, the processual essentiality, the necessity of cultivating a practice for archivizing or databasing their face artifacts, those mediations, into some kind of assemblage of series or sequence of evidence. Now, this might be facial mimicry, right? We all do this. We don't call it an archive or a database, but we're all doing it all the time. Facial mimicry from somebody else's expression to one's own core beams through the mirror neuron system. Face in the mirror, face as an electronic mug book, all work that way. And the procedural reason is simple. In order to objectivize the face, more than one face must already be observable. Now in these algorithms, they're trained by then the digitally copied and digitized face artifacts, sometimes more than 10,000 in number, presented to that algorithm as probe sets and evaluation protocol. Because of that, it necessarily then follows that any media artwork that is using these algorithms, whatever its main genreification, however we largely talk about it, whether it's net art, interactive, robotics, activism, is also database art, which of course Lev Manovich pointed out almost most digital art engages in some form or another. Now that algorithm is going to work largely from a process of template matching, right? From firstly a query face in an image record taken in with a camera, compared to some match class from that face database, or a living face of some passersby in a dead artifact, and then that algorithm is applying a mask onto that. Now I'm going to suggest that those algorithms also fundamentally within their training protocols operate through a syllogistic logic, and it's partially that connects them so much to their media histories. So let's go back to Aristotle for just a moment. Always do, can't help it. So the first primary text in Western culture on physiognomy was written about 300 BCE, not actually by Aristotle, but by his students, but it was borrowing from his text largely. And defining physiognomic thought then as form interpretation or nature knowing. Now that action from a semiotic standpoint operated between a physiological behavior, a psychological phenomena, and the action to which it's giving rise. So if that was fire, the body and the face would be the smoke, the emotion perhaps would be the fire, and then that interpretation, oh wait, they are a non-citizen, that isn't an emotion we want to be seeing. That's that interpretant. Or a liquid stat pro aliquo, something stands for something else. Now in that syllogistic thought here, we have Hercules and the lion. Aristotle had three main methodologies in that original text. One was looking at humans themselves, one the ethnicities of different humans, and then of course comparing human to non-human animals. And that syllogistic structure in that original text from 300 BCE was defining that major premise, A, don't worry, we'll get into this quite a bit, which is the subject. The middle premise, common to both, C, the minor premise, that predicate. So, A, B, B, C. Wait, then they must be behaving like a lion. Okay, in essence, that person's face looks like a lion's face. That lion behaves this way. Therefore, this person must behave like a lion. A lion is magnanimous, something we should honor. Therefore, that person is magnanimous. Which you might recognize from Giovanni Battista della Porta, 1586, and as Human Physiognomy, some of the most zoomorphic syllogism in history. So to put it another way, and here quasi-natural language, linear diagrammatic logic, and as a propositional calculus, but I'll be following the quasi-natural, if that's okay. If A, then B, and if B, then C, then A equals C. So if there is this physiological form A, then there must also be that psychological function. If A, then C. That's that causal conditional. As a causal law, A equals C. That's where what's happening in the algorithm some of the previous presenters spoke about. Yeah? And that's how you get to generalization, universalization. That's how you get from case studies to applications to everyone. Sorry, there's a bit more. So looking then at within media art specifically, this I'm going to mark as sort of the stun null. This is the 0 hour for media art dealing with automated facial expression analysis, and that's Takeo Kanad's Computer Physiognomy, 1970, World's Fair, Japan. And Takeo Kanad is now one of the leading experts in facial recognition, designing most of the main databases that are used to test algorithms. And essentially, the algorithm works by detecting real views of the human face in photographic artifacts, extracting facial points or landmarks, and classifying these facial expressions under some keyword-based metadata. And apparently that was a bit much. So real quick, let me just take you through what for some of the algorithms. Face to Facebook, famous one many of you most likely know. If A, then B, B, and C, and A equals C. But A equals C a priori because of the dominant face concept. So where we are today is hopefully meta art can examine more what the leading face concept is. Most media artworks are not engaging how the concept is informing the algorithmic structure, but it's starting to. Geminoid project, for example, is dealing directly with facial coding. So algorithms that are working essentially by not just labels for what the expression, whether it's happy, sad, disgust, fear, surprise, but also looking at the individual muscles of the face. And that's how we get more away from only coming in at the interpretant stage of what the face concept is, what the face should be, what it should mean, but more and more looking at what the body is actually doing. So these are a few of these other media artworks engaging it. Sorry, there's not time to look at these. Mood meter. Here's the syllogistic logic again between the leading algorithm in Germany using the Japanese facial expression database. So yes, most of the media artworks coming out of Germany are based on images in Japan. Lev Manovich, same issue. So thank you so much for your time.